Something just happened that the mainstream media is rushing past, and if you blink, you'll miss exactly why it matters so much. On March 21, 2026, an Iranian ballistic missile punched through Israel's vaunted air defense systems, the same systems that cost billions and are supposed to be among the most sophisticated on the planet. And it landed in Dimona, not a suburb of Tel Aviv, not a port city, Dimona, the city that sits less than 10 kilometers from the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center, the facility that the entire world knows and Israel officially denies, houses the Jewish state's undeclared nuclear arsenal. For the first time in history, Iranian missiles penetrated Israel's air defense systems in the area around the nuclear facility. Think about that for a moment. Think about what that sentence actually means. Residents of Dimona thought they were safe, that the very presence of a nuclear facility nearby would mean the area was the most protected in all of Israel. That illusion is now gone. And when illusions this powerful shatter, the world shifts. Nobody is telling you the full story. Because this is not just a story about missiles and injuries and craters in residential streets. This is a story about thresholds being crossed, quietly, methodically, with the entire world watching, but only a few people truly understanding what they are seeing. This war began on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched surprise airstrikes on multiple sites and cities across Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and several other senior Iranian officials. Let that sink in. The Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, a man who commanded the world's largest network of regional proxy forces, who sat atop a nuclear program that had been the central flashpoint of geopolitics for 2 decades, was killed in a surprise military strike. And the world kept spinning. Markets trembled, oil prices spiked, the Strait of Hormuz got choked off, but life went on everywhere else. But what is happening now, 4 weeks into this conflict, is something qualitatively different, something that demands your full attention. You have to understand the architecture of how we got here because it didn't start on February 28th. It started much earlier in the quiet back rooms of diplomacy where a deal was almost made and then deliberately wasn't. In February 2026, indirect negotiations mediated by Oman showed real progress, with Iran willing to make concessions, but President Trump said he was not thrilled with the talks, and then the strikes came. So before we even talk about what's happening on the ground today, we have to sit with that fact. A diplomatic solution was within reach. The Omani foreign minister said so, Iranian officials said so, and then it wasn't. And now we have a full-scale war in the Middle East involving the United States military, Israeli air power, Iranian ballistic missiles, proxy conflicts across Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and the Persian Gulf, and a Strait of Hormuz that is functionally closed to international shipping. Oil prices have risen considerably, and the Trump administration asked allies to send warships to protect tankers, but other countries were unwilling to participate. That last detail matters enormously. The United States is in this war essentially alone, with Israel and the coalition it expected to assemble simply did not materialize. Now let's talk about what happened on March 21st in real terms. Iranian state television framed the strikes as a response to an attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear enrichment complex earlier in the day, marking a stark new phase of tit-for-tat targeting in the conflict, now in its 4th week. The IDF, curiously, said it was not familiar with any strike on Natanz. The Pentagon declined to comment. Think about what that tells you. On March 21, 2026, 2 nuclear sites in 2 countries were targeted within hours of each other. And for the first time in history, a state targeted a city housing a nuclear facility in direct response to strikes on its own nuclear infrastructure. A threshold has been crossed. When historians look back at this moment, they will mark this date, not because a nuclear weapon was used, but because the logic of nuclear deterrence, the entire architecture of mutual assured destruction that has kept the world from catastrophe for 80 years, was directly tested and partially failed. Here is what the official narrative keeps glossing over. Israel's military has intercepted 92% of incoming Iranian projectiles throughout this conflict. But the thinning missile salvos concern experts because one ballistic missile can have a tragic result, and it did. 2 ballistic missiles, each carrying hundreds of kilograms of conventional explosives, broke through the Iron Dome, the Arrow system, the David Sling, the entire layered defense architecture, and hit civilian residential areas in Dimona and Arad. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the fact that no one was killed was due to luck. The Prime Minister of Israel standing in the crater of an Iranian missile strike in his own country, telling the world that survival was a matter of luck. That is the reality of where we are. And now consider the strategic significance of Dimona. The city lies about 10 kilometers from the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center, a facility officially dedicated to research but widely believed by analysts to house Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal. Israel has never confirmed it has nuclear weapons. It operates under what diplomats call nuclear ambiguity, a policy of neither confirming nor denying, but every serious analyst, every intelligence service, every government in the world operates on the assumption that Israel has somewhere between 80 and 400 nuclear warheads. If such a sensitive security site were damaged even minimally, it can be assumed that Israel would need to respond in an exceptional manner. It would not be able to suffice with a parallel strike on nuclear sites in Iran, since it is already doing so in any case. Read that sentence one more time. An Israeli security analyst is saying in print that a direct hit on the Dimona facility would trigger a response from Israel that goes beyond anything currently on the table. We all know what that means. We just aren't allowed to say it clearly in polite company. So what is the actual military and strategic picture right now? Iran entered 2026 with 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, enough, if further enriched, for as many as 10 nuclear weapons. Before the June 2025 strikes, Tehran was less than 2 weeks away from enriching enough uranium for one nuclear bomb, according to US intelligence assessments. That's what drove the timeline. That's the pressure that made diplomacy feel impossible, or was used to make it feel impossible, because there is another way to read all of this. And if you want to understand the geopolitics honestly, you have to at least consider it. According to the Washington Post, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia Mohammed bin Salman had multiple phone calls with Trump urging him to attack Iran, and Trump's decision to attack Iran came after the Saudi Arabian and Israeli governments lobbied him repeatedly to make the move. That is not a conspiracy theory, that is reported fact. The most powerful state in the region that isn't Israel and isn't Iran, the kingdom that controls vast oil reserves and has been in a Cold War with Tehran for decades, was actively lobbying the American president to go to war. And there is more. A Gulf diplomat alleged that U.S. intermediaries Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were acting in Israeli interests to pressure the United States into a military confrontation. Now we are getting somewhere, because once you understand who is driving this conflict, you can begin to understand why a diplomatic deal that was reportedly within reach in late February was never actually allowed to close. The architecture of the Middle East's power structure, Saudi money, Israeli security doctrine, and American military capability converged to produce this war, and now all three are facing consequences, none of them fully anticipated. Trump suspended planned strikes on Iranian power plants, but only until Friday. The US is building up options for military escalation, including potential boots on the ground, while also testing the diplomatic waters. US and Israeli officials are planning for another 2 to 3 weeks of war, regardless of whether talks take place. Read that carefully. They are planning for more war even while talking about peace. The administration is, in the words of its own officials, negotiating under fire to maintain leverage. This is the logic of coercion, the idea that you can bomb a country into a deal while simultaneously offering it one. The historical record on this strategy is not encouraging. It didn't work in Vietnam, it didn't work in Iraq, it didn't work in Afghanistan. But somehow, it is being tried again, and the American public is being told, with only 33% approval, according to recent polling, that the mission's purpose has been clearly explained. The disconnect casts doubt on Trump's claims this week that a breakthrough could be imminent, even as momentum inexorably grows toward a dangerous escalation of the conflict, with thousands of US troops already in the region. Trump himself offered a revealing window into his thinking when he told members of Congress about the Iranians they want to make a deal so badly, but they're afraid to say it because they figure they'll be killed by their own people. There is something almost poignant about that statement. The President of the United States projecting the logic of a business negotiation onto a civilization that has been under siege for 4 weeks. Iran is not a counterparty in a real estate deal. It is a nation of 90 million people with a 2,500-year-old cultural identity that has absorbed invasions from Alexander the Great to Saddam Hussein, and it has not yet broken. And what of the world beyond the direct combatants? Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Maria Zakharova said such strikes posed a real risk of catastrophic disaster throughout the Middle East. Russia, which has its own complicated relationship with Iran and its own reasons to watch American military overextension with interest, is now publicly warning of catastrophe. Gulf countries have expelled Iranian diplomats but not intervened militarily in the conflict. Turkey's foreign minister warned the Gulf may be forced to retaliate against Iran. Saudi Arabia itself intercepted Iranian missiles. The entire region is being pulled into the vortex, not by ideology or ancient hatreds alone, but by the fundamental logic of escalation, where every action produces a reaction that produces another action, and the ladder of intensity has only one direction. A Trump advisor has warned of Israel contemplating using a nuclear weapon in the Iran conflict as the conflict continues. This was said aloud by someone inside the administration, and it passed through the news cycle in a single afternoon. That is the single most alarming sentence in any news report from the past month, and it received about a tenth of the coverage given to Trump's Truth Social posts. This is the information environment we are living in, where the possibility of nuclear use in the Middle East is mentioned in passing, while the daily drama of political messaging dominates the feed. What does the peace process actually look like right now? Iran has publicly rejected the US 15-point proposal and has offered its own 5 conditions for ending the war, including a halt to aggression and assassinations, the establishment of mechanisms to ensure the war doesn't resume, payment of war damages and reparations, and, in a maximalist requirement Trump could never accept, sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is asking for control over 20% of the world's oil supply as a condition of peace. That is not a negotiating position. That is a declaration that Tehran sees itself as fighting for its survival, and nations fighting for their survival do not make reasonable concessions. They fight. Netanyahu is concerned Trump might strike a deal that falls well short of Israel's objectives, includes significant concessions, and limits Israel's ability to conduct strikes against Iran. Israeli leaders were skeptical Iran had actually offered the concessions the US claimed. So here is the full picture. The United States wants a deal but is bombing anyway. Israel wants to continue the campaign and is suspicious of American diplomacy. Iran wants survival and is demanding terms Washington will never accept. Russia is watching and warning. The Gulf states are caught in the middle. Trump renounced NATO's assistance, and unexpectedly, US allies in the Indo-Pacific, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, for refusing to join US-led attacks on Iran during the war, declaring that the United States does not need the help of anyone. The coalition of democracies that America spent 80 years building is fraying in real time over a war that was started by a surprise attack against a country that was reportedly close to a diplomatic deal. This is the world we are living in, not the world of clean narratives where good guys bomb bad guys and the credits roll. This is the world of unintended consequences, of pressures and counter-pressures, of a Strait of Hormuz that was open to commerce 4 weeks ago and is now a battlefield, of an Israeli nuclear facility that the world's most sophisticated air defense systems failed to fully protect, of a US president who is simultaneously claiming total victory while deploying thousands of additional troops and threatening to obliterate power plants. These are the contradictions that define a conflict that has already escaped its original frame, and the Dimona strikes are the clearest signal yet that the next phase, whatever it is, will demand from all of us a level of clear-eyed understanding that the mainstream media is frankly not providing. The world is not on the edge of war. The world is already in one. The question is what kind it becomes next.